How to reboot your stress response. Hola, I'm Bastin and I'm a career coach. You know how some working women are dealing with chronic stress and are on the verge of a breakdown? Well, I teach these power women how to deal with stressors so they can keep their career without burning out. I teach them and I help them with my Reboot Stress Response course, which is like a powerful 3-step process how to deal with stressors that gain time and energy instead of spending a lot of time and energy on ruminating about these thoughts. I call it reboot because there are so many misconceptions about stress. The initial stress response, like the hormones released in our bodies, the pounding hearts, your veins opening, your pupils getting bigger, you're getting alert. That is a stress response to like an external stressor, a life-threatening situation right there, right now, in this time. And our ancestors, when they were eye to eye to a saber-toothed tiger, it was very useful to go in that moment and have that stress response of fight or flight or freeze. But nowadays, we have that same stress response to our daily life stressors. And what happens is most of those stressors are not external anymore, but they're in our head. Like we are worrying about future events. What will happen? Will I keep my job? What is the other person thinking of me? Am I good enough? Those are thoughts, those are stressors that we are having like a fight, flight, or freeze response to. And what happens is that if you are not conscious about like how you're reacting to those stressors that are not external but that are in your head, then it can be time and energy draining. And it can have like big effects on your daily life. So what I do is that I teach women how to turn a stressor, like an internal stressor, a worry, a thought about the future or about what somebody else might think of you, and turn it into pressure instead of anxiety. In the next couple of weeks, I am going to share more free coaching videos where I dive deeper into the subject and where I explain my Reboot, the stress response program, step by step. But for now, I would like to dive a little bit deeper more into the anxiety versus pressure. So if I share my screen here, then like I said, in our brain, in our system, there are 3 possible responses that we can have to stress. And the first 2 is the flight or the freeze. And you can see, like, if you're eye to eye to a life-threatening situation, for example, our ancestors eye to eye to a saber-toothed tiger, that both can work well. Like you fly away from the danger, or sometimes if you freeze or you act bad, then the stressor will give up and walk away, and both can save your life. And the other one is the fight response, that you fight against the stressor in order to save your life. But if you look at like the stressors that we mostly have in our daily lives in these days, then the flight and the freeze response is rarely effective. Because what happens is that thought, that worry, if you try to fly away from it, it's not possible because it is in your head and it will stay in your head. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. It will always try to come up and float up. So from the 3 possible stress responses, fighting is the only effective way to deal with an internal stressor, an internal worry. And then I'm not talking about like the boxing gloves and fighting against it, but I'm talking about actively using tools that I'm gonna discuss in these videos in the next couple of weeks, and use these tools in order to fight against that stressor instead of try to avoid it and try to get away from it. Because what happens if you do a flight or a freeze response, it will lead to anxiety. And if you use the fight response, it will lead up to pressure. Now, let's look at like the meaning of those two words. Like from the anxiety.org website, anxiety is a fear or worry that does not go away and can get worse over time. It can influence your life to the extent that it can interfere with your daily activities like work and or relationship. So I want to ask you, does this ring a bell to you? Do you sometimes have a thought, a worry, or a fear that you just cannot shake off, and that it is interfering with your attention at that moment? And what happens with the anxiety? It will drain your energy, and it will cost you so much time, because it doesn't matter how long you will think about that thought or how long you ruminate about this thought, it will not come to a solution. You will not get to a solution or a better situation. But what you can do is, instead of like turning it into anxiety, if you turn it into pressure, pressure obviously has like a lot of meanings. But the meaning that I give to pressure in relation to the stress response is that pressure is a stressor that you have control over. It gives you the motivation to perform and to be the best version of yourself. Because what you see is that a lot of people think about stress that it is something bad, that is unhealthy, that it has all these risk factors for your health, that the less stress you have, the happier you are, and that if you experience a stress, what you try to do is to calm down. And you see it like in the media all the time, like the top 10 things to calm down if you have stress. But the reality is, stress was initially made to survive, like what we're talking about with the saber-toothed tiger and our ancestors. But today, we also need stress in order to perform, to get to results. Because if we don't have stress in our lives, we wouldn't have an incentive or a reason to get out of bed in the morning. Because stress is as easy as like being hungry and looking for food. Or stress is something like, in the most basic form, it's just like a value of yours is in danger. And you are going to try to avoid the danger and to save that thing that you value. And it can be something simple as like looking for food because you're hungry. But it can also be that you want to perform, that you take your job seriously and that you want to be good enough and that you worry about not being good enough. And then you have the two responses. You can ruminate about it, or you can take action and use that energy, that stress response, in order to perform better and to get better at your job. Now, I understand it's easier said than done, because depending on how old you are, that many years, you are dealing with stress in a certain way. And those are pathways in your brain, and it's hard to get out of it. But the good news is, if you're consistent and conscious about your stress response from now on, and what I'm going to teach you in the next couple of weeks, is that it is possible to turn that around, to always look at the control. I'm going to talk more about control because it is super important to focus on where you have control over. And then if you practice that on a daily basis, and I'm here to keep you accountable and we're going to do it together, is that you can change it and you can get rid of anxiety. I've seen from very close by what it does to a woman when anxiety is burning somebody down. My wife burned down because of anxiety and the way that she was dealing with stressors. And even though I have a master's degree in education, I got a bachelor's degree in social work, at that point I wasn't able to help her to get out of it. And I came to like a no matter what decision of helping her to do whatever it takes to help her to deal with anxiety in the right way. I did an extensive self-study about work stress, burnout, anxiety, and all that together is what made me develop the Reboot Your Stress Response. Because if you look at the numbers for anxiety in the United States, then you can see that 18% of the people in the United States experience an anxiety disorder. And that approximately of children and teenagers experience an anxiety disorder, and that only 1/3 of those suffering from an anxiety disorder receive treatment, even though the disorders are highly treatable. And I totally unlike this comes from the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, and I totally agree with it, like how treatable it is as soon as you're dedicated. If you come to that no matter what decision, if you slam your fist on the table saying it is enough and that you want to learn how to deal with anxiety, then it is absolutely possible. I made like a blueprint of it, of the Reboot Your Stress Response, where you find more information about like the 3 different zones where you can where you go through once you're dealing with a stressor. And what happens is, like, with those 3 steps, success is guaranteed. It's like you're having a lock that you want to open, and like with the Reboot program, you have the key in your hand, and you only have to look and search for which key it is. And only that knowledge of knowing, like, I'm going to get out of here, changes the situation completely. So I highly recommend that you download the Reboot blueprint right now and study it, and then look out for more videos in the next couple of weeks, because we're going to dive deeper into it and we're going to turn that around. I hope to see you later. Adios, saludos.